Welcome to Volume and Vision. Let me ask you something. How many times have you promised yourself, "I'll do it later"? You probably don't even remember the first time you said it. Maybe it happened this morning. You had an important task waiting for you, but instead of starting, you checked your phone. Then you watched one short video. Then another. You replied to a message. You opened social media for just 5 minutes. And somehow, almost an hour disappeared. Then came the familiar thought. I've wasted enough time. I'll start properly tomorrow. But tomorrow arrives, and somehow the same story repeats. The task remains unfinished. The guilt gets heavier, and your confidence gets a little weaker. This is what makes procrastination so dangerous. It doesn't usually destroy your life in one dramatic moment. It works quietly. One postponed task, one missed opportunity, one ignored responsibility, one more promise that you'll start tomorrow. And eventually, those tiny delays begin shaping the direction of your life. But here's something you need to understand before we go any further. If you procrastinate, it doesn't automatically mean you're lazy. In fact, some of the most ambitious people struggle with procrastination. They have dreams. They have plans. They know exactly what they want. And sometimes that's precisely the problem. The bigger the dream, the more pressure they feel to get everything right. And when the pressure becomes uncomfortable, the brain looks for an escape. It says, "Let's do something easier first." And that little sentence can steal years. Think about a student who has an important examination coming up. The student knows the exam matters. They know that preparation requires months of consistent work. But instead of studying, they keep preparing to study. They organize their notes. They search for the perfect timetable. They watch videos about productivity. They buy new stationery. They create a beautiful schedule. Everything looks productive, except one thing. They aren't actually studying. This is one of procrastination's cleverest tricks. It doesn't always tell you to do nothing. Sometimes it convinces you to do everything except what actually matters. And that's why beating procrastination isn't simply about becoming more hardworking. It's about becoming more honest with yourself. You need to recognize the difference between movement and progress. You can answer 20 emails and still avoid the one decision that could change your career. You can clean your entire room and still avoid opening the textbook. You can spend 2 hours planning a project and still avoid doing the first 5 minutes of actual work. Being busy feels good because it gives you evidence that you're doing something. But the real question is, are you doing the thing that moves your life forward? That question can be uncomfortable, but it can also be liberating. Because once you know what you're actually avoiding, you can begin changing your behavior. And here's where things get interesting. Most procrastination begins with a simple trade. Your brain chooses something that feels good now in exchange for something that matters later. Imagine you have 2 buttons in front of you. One button gives you immediate comfort. The other gives you a better future. Your phone gives you entertainment immediately. Studying gives you results later. Ordering unnecessary food gives you pleasure immediately. Saving money gives you freedom later. Sleeping in feels comfortable immediately. Going for a workout gives you benefits later. Watching another episode feels enjoyable immediately. Working on your dream gives you satisfaction later. The human mind naturally notices the immediate reward more strongly. That's why procrastination can feel so convincing in the moment. You're not thinking about 6 months from now. You're thinking about how you feel during the next 5 minutes. And this is where you need to become smarter than your impulses. You don't have to eliminate every temptation from your life. You simply have to stop allowing temporary comfort to make permanent decisions for you. Because every time you postpone something important, you're making a decision. You're deciding that comfort today is more valuable than progress tomorrow. Once you see procrastination this way, it becomes much easier to recognize. Suppose you're working on a difficult assignment. You suddenly feel the urge to check your phone. Instead of automatically reaching for it, pause for 3 seconds. Ask yourself, what am I trying to escape from right now? Maybe the assignment is confusing. Maybe you don't know how to begin. Maybe you're worried your answer won't be good. Maybe you're simply bored. That moment of awareness is powerful. Because procrastination becomes much harder when you can see it happening. Now let's talk about one of its biggest disguises, perfectionism. Perfectionism tells you that you're not ready. It whispers, wait until you know more. Wait until you have better equipment. Wait until you have more time. Wait until you can do it properly. Wait until you feel confident. The problem is that confidence often comes after action, not before it. Think about someone who wants to start making videos. They spend weeks researching cameras, then microphones, then editing software, then thumbnails, then fonts, then backgrounds. Then they watch successful creators and compare themselves. Eventually, months pass. They still haven't published anything. Another person starts with an ordinary phone, an imperfect voice, and basic editing. Their first video isn't great. Neither is the second. But by the 20th video, they've learned things the first person hasn't even experienced. The difference wasn't talent. It was willingness to be bad at something long enough to become good at it. This is an uncomfortable truth about improvement. You usually have to produce imperfect work before you can produce excellent work. The first version is supposed to teach you. It isn't supposed to prove that you're already an expert. So when perfectionism tells you to wait, change the question. Don't ask, "Can I do this perfectly?" Ask, "Can I make a rough first attempt?" That's a much easier challenge. Write the terrible first paragraph. Solve the first problem. Record the first video. Send the first application. Take the first walk. Open the first page. The goal isn't to finish everything. The goal is to break the wall between thinking and doing. Because once you start, something strange happens. The task that looked enormous begins shrinking. Before you start, your brain imagines every possible difficulty. After you start, you deal with one difficulty at a time. That's why action creates clarity. You don't always think your way into action. Sometimes you act your way into clarity. Imagine standing outside a dark room. You can't see what's inside. You could spend an hour standing there imagining what might be in the room. Or you could turn on the light. Starting is like turning on the light. Suddenly you can see the actual problem. And once you can see the problem, you can solve it. This is why one of the most effective ways to defeat procrastination is to make the first step ridiculously small. Don't tell yourself, "I need to finish my entire project tonight." Tell yourself, "I'll open the document." Don't say, "I need to study for 3 hours." Say, "I'll study 1 page." Don't say, "I need to completely transform my fitness." Say, "I'll put on my shoes and walk outside." The first step doesn't need to impress anyone. It only needs to happen. And once it happens, you have something incredibly valuable. Momentum. Momentum is often more useful than motivation. Motivation says, "I feel like doing this." Momentum says, "I've already started, so I'll continue." That's a completely different psychological state. Think about pushing a heavy object. The first push requires the most effort. Once it begins moving, keeping it moving becomes easier. Your tasks can work the same way. Starting is the heavy push. The next 10 minutes are easier. Then another 10. Then another. Eventually, you're no longer fighting the decision to begin. You're simply working. But there is another enemy standing between you and that first step. Fear. And fear doesn't always announce itself as fear. Sometimes it sounds like logic. "I need more information. I'll do it when I'm less busy. I should wait until I'm more prepared. I'll start when I have a better plan." These statements may occasionally be true. But sometimes they're simply fear wearing a professional-looking disguise. Consider someone who wants to apply for their dream job. They keep improving their resume. They keep taking courses. They keep telling themselves they'll apply once they're fully qualified. But secretly, they're afraid of rejection. So they keep preparing forever. Preparation feels safe. Application creates uncertainty. But here's the problem. You cannot receive an opportunity you never asked for. You cannot get rejected by a door you never knock on. And you cannot discover what you're capable of if you spend your entire life protecting yourself from failure. Failure isn't always proof that you're not good enough. Sometimes it's simply information. It tells you what needs improvement. It tells you what didn't work. It tells you what to try differently next time. Avoiding failure may protect your feelings temporarily. But it can also protect you from success. And that is a much more expensive trade. So the next time you feel resistance before an important task, don't immediately obey it. Pause, notice it, and ask, "Is this actually difficult, or am I uncomfortable?" There is a difference. Difficulty requires a solution. Discomfort often requires courage, and sometimes you don't plan. You simply need to tolerate a few minutes of discomfort without escaping. That's a skill. And like every skill, it gets stronger through practice. Start by practicing with small things. When you want to check your phone while working, wait 5 minutes. When you want to quit studying after 10 minutes, continue for another 5. When you want to postpone a small responsibility, finish it immediately. You're teaching your brain something important. I can feel uncomfortable without immediately running away. That lesson extends far beyond productivity. It changes the way you approach life. Because life will constantly present you with things you don't feel like doing. There will be difficult conversations. There will be boring responsibilities. There will be uncertain decisions. There will be moments when you don't feel confident. You cannot build a meaningful life by waiting until every action feels comfortable. At some point, you have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that brings us to one of the most important questions you can ask yourself. What am I repeatedly postponing? Think about it carefully. Is there an email, a phone call, an exam, a project, a job application, a financial decision, a difficult conversation, a health goal, something you've wanted to start for months? Don't judge yourself. Just identify it, because an unnamed problem is difficult to solve. Once you give it a name, you can give it a first step. And that first step might be much smaller than you think. Maybe you don't need to solve your entire problem today. Maybe you only need to spend 10 minutes facing it. 10 minutes can be enough to change the direction of a day. And a changed day, repeated again and again, can eventually change a life. So don't wait for some dramatic transformation. Don't wait for Monday. Don't wait for the first day of next month. Don't wait for the perfect schedule. Don't wait until you suddenly become disciplined. Start with the smallest action you can take. Because the person who keeps taking small steps will eventually pass the person who spends their life planning the perfect first step. And if you've been procrastinating for a long time, remember this. You are not required to repair your entire past. You only have to make a better decision about what you do next. The wasted hours are gone. The postponed days are gone. You cannot negotiate with yesterday. But you can still decide what happens next. And sometimes, that decision is surprisingly simple. Close the unnecessary tab. Put the phone down. Open the document. Take out the book. Write the first sentence. Do the first problem. Make the first call. Take the first step. Not because you suddenly feel ready, but because your future deserves a chance that your present comfort keeps trying to steal. And once you understand that, procrastination starts losing its greatest weapon. It can no longer convince you that you need to feel ready before you begin. You simply begin. But starting is only half the battle. Because there is another problem that appears after you finally begin. You discover that you have too many things competing for your attention. One task is waiting. Another deadline is approaching. Someone needs a reply. Your phone is buzzing. Your inbox is filling up. You remember something you forgot yesterday. And suddenly your brain feels like a room where everyone is talking at the same time. When everything feels important, it's surprisingly easy to do nothing important. This is why procrastination is sometimes caused not by a lack of effort, but by a lack of direction. You don't need more tasks. You need fewer priorities. Think about your attention as a limited budget. Every morning, you receive a certain amount of mental energy. You can spend it on almost anything. Messages, entertainment, small chores, other people's requests, random research, or the goals that actually matter to you. But once that attention is spent, you don't magically receive another unlimited supply. This is why one of the most important productivity skills is deciding what deserves your attention before the day starts deciding for you. Instead of waking up and immediately reacting to whatever appears on your screen, take a moment to identify the few things that genuinely matter. Not 20 things, not 15, just a small number of meaningful actions. Ask yourself, if I accomplish these things today, will I feel that the day actually moved my life forward? That question is far more useful than asking, how much can I get done today? Because productivity isn't a competition to see how many boxes you can tick. It's about making progress on the things that matter. Imagine two people. The first completes 12 small tasks. The second completes 3 important tasks. At the end of the day, who accomplished more? It depends on the tasks. Sending 10 routine messages may feel productive. Spending 2 focused hours building an important skill may produce far greater results. This is where the difference between being busy and being effective becomes obvious. Busy people often ask, what else can I do? Effective people ask, what matters most? That small change in thinking can completely transform the way you spend your day. And it leads to another powerful idea. You don't have to do everything. In fact, trying to do everything may be one of the reasons you're procrastinating. Imagine that you've created a list of 20 goals. Learn programming, exercise every day, read more books, start a business, improve your finances, learn a language, build a website, create content, travel more, spend more time with family, and 10 other things. Every goal sounds exciting, but when you look at the entire list, your brain sees an enormous mountain. Where do you begin? What should you do first? What if you choose the wrong thing? What if another goal is more important? And suddenly you spend your evening thinking about the list instead of doing anything on it. The solution isn't to work faster. It's to reduce the number of things you're asking yourself to accomplish simultaneously. Choose a few major priorities. Give them your best attention. Let the rest wait. This doesn't mean your other dreams don't matter. It means they don't all have to happen today. There is freedom in accepting that. You don't need to build your entire future this week. You only need to work on the next meaningful step. And once you know your priorities, something else becomes easier. Saying no. This may sound unrelated to procrastination, but it isn't. Every time you say yes to something unnecessary, you're potentially saying no to something important. Someone asks you to help with a project. You agree. Someone invites you somewhere. You agree. Another request arrives. You agree again. Soon your schedule is full. And then you complain that you don't have time for your own goals. The problem isn't always a lack of time. Sometimes it's an inability to protect your time. Of course, you can't say no to everything. We all have responsibilities, but you can become more selective. Before accepting a new commitment, pause and ask, does this deserve the time it's going to cost me? That question changes the decision. Because every commitment has a price. Sometimes the price is an hour. Sometimes it's an entire evening. Sometimes it's mental energy that prevents you from doing something important afterward. Learning to protect your attention isn't selfish. It's responsible. If you have an important goal, you have to make room for it. And making room often means removing something else. Now let's talk about another major source of procrastination. Unclear goals. You might say, I want to become successful. But what does that mean? More money, a better job, your own business, more freedom, recognition. Without a clear definition, your brain has no obvious destination. It's like getting into a car and saying, take me somewhere better. The driver would have no idea where to go. Your goals need direction. Instead of saying, I want to get fit, define what that means. Maybe you want to run 5 kilometers comfortably. Maybe you want to exercise 4 times a week. Maybe you want to improve your strength. Instead of saying, I want to learn coding, decide what you're going to learn and what you'll build with it. Instead of saying, I want to read more, choose a number of pages or books. The more clearly you define the destination, the easier it becomes to identify the road. This is why specific goals are powerful. They reduce the number of decisions you need to make. And fewer decisions mean less mental resistance. Suppose you decide, I'll study sometime tomorrow. Tomorrow arrives. When should you study? Morning, afternoon, evening, after lunch, before dinner. Your brain now has another decision to make. Instead, say, tomorrow at 7:30, I'll study for 30 minutes at my desk. Now the decision has already been made. When 7:30 arrives, you don't need to negotiate. You simply begin. This is one of the secrets of consistent people. They don't make every decision at the moment they need to act. They make many decisions beforehand. They create systems, and systems reduce the need for willpower. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't wake up every morning and debate whether brushing your teeth is worth it. You simply do it. Why? Because the behavior has become automatic. The long-term goal is to turn important actions into something that requires less negotiation. At first, you need discipline. Eventually, the routine starts carrying you. But routines need to be realistic. One of the biggest mistakes is designing a perfect schedule for an imaginary version of themselves. They create a schedule where they wake up early, exercise for an hour, meditate, read 50 pages, study for 4 hours, work on a side business, eat perfectly, and go to sleep early. It looks incredible on paper. Then real life arrives. You wake up late. You're tired. Something unexpected happens. You miss one activity, then another. By evening, the entire schedule has collapsed. And you feel like a failure. The problem wasn't necessarily you. The plan was unrealistic. A useful routine should survive ordinary days, not just perfect days. Build around what you can consistently do. If you can study for 30 minutes every day, start with 30. If you can exercise for 20 minutes, start there. You can always increase the challenge later. Consistency creates capacity. And this brings us to another important principle. Don't build your routine around your best days. Build it around your average days. Your best day might allow you to work for 6 hours. But what happens when you're tired? What happens when you have college? What happens when family responsibilities appear? What happens when your energy is low? If your system only works under perfect conditions, it isn't really a system. It's a temporary burst of enthusiasm. The goal is to create something you can repeat. And repetition is where transformation happens. Think about a single drop of water. One drop doesn't seem powerful. But repeated drops can eventually change stone. The same is true for your actions. One workout won't transform your body. One study session won't transform your career. One application won't guarantee a job. One video won't build a successful channel. But repeated actions can create results that seem impossible when viewed from the beginning. This is why procrastination becomes so expensive. It doesn't just steal today's opportunity. It interrupts the chain of actions that could have created tomorrow's result. Now consider something else. Your environment can either make procrastination easier or harder. Imagine trying to concentrate while sitting in a room filled with distractions. Your phone is on the desk. The television is nearby. Notifications are appearing. Several browser tabs are open. Food is within reach. Every few minutes something asks for your attention. Then you blame yourself for lacking discipline. But perhaps the environment is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is designed to capture attention. Modern technology is extremely good at that. So don't fight every distraction individually. Remove as many as possible before you begin. If you need to study, keep your phone away. If you're writing, close unnecessary applications. If you're working online, keep unrelated websites closed. If you want to read, keep the book somewhere visible. Make the behavior you want easy. Make the behavior you don't want slightly difficult. This sounds simple, but simple changes can have enormous effects. If checking social media requires picking up your phone from another room, you're less likely to do it impulsively. If your study materials are already on your desk, beginning requires less effort. You are designing your surroundings to support your intentions. And there's another powerful environmental tool: preparation. Prepare tomorrow's first task tonight. Before you go to sleep, decide what you're going to work on the next day. Put the necessary materials where you'll see them. Write down the first action. Then when tomorrow arrives, you don't have to figure out where to begin. You already know. This removes one of procrastination's favorite weapons: uncertainty. And now let's discuss something that almost everyone struggles with: the temptation to choose easy tasks instead of important ones. Imagine you have a difficult report to write. But you also have 10 small messages to answer. The messages are easy. The report is uncomfortable, so you answer the messages. Then you organize your files. Then you clean your inbox. Then you check the news. Then you make coffee. Everything feels productive, but the report is still waiting. This is called productive procrastination. You're not doing nothing. You're simply using easy work to avoid difficult work. Sometimes easy tasks are necessary. But if you repeatedly find yourself doing them whenever an important task appears, pay attention. That's a pattern. One useful strategy is to identify the task you're most likely to avoid and give it attention early. You don't necessarily have to finish it first. But make meaningful progress before the day becomes crowded. Because difficult tasks tend to become harder psychologically as we postpone them. A small amount of progress in the morning can remove a huge amount of mental pressure later. However, there are days when starting with the hardest task isn't the best option. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Maybe you need a small win first. That's okay. Start with something easy if it helps you build momentum. The goal isn't to follow a rigid productivity rule. The goal is to understand your own behavior and choose the strategy that helps you move. And when a task feels particularly unpleasant, use another simple technique. Shrink the commitment. Don't promise yourself that you'll work until it's finished. Promise yourself that you'll work for 15 minutes. 15 minutes is psychologically different from the whole afternoon. Your brain doesn't have to imagine an endless period of discomfort. It only needs to accept a small commitment. And once you're inside the task, you may discover that it isn't as terrible as your imagination suggested. This is one of the most interesting things about procrastination. We often suffer more from anticipating a task than from actually doing it. The fear before starting can be larger than the discomfort during the work. Think about making an important phone call. You might spend an hour worrying about it. What will you say? What if they react badly? What if you sound stupid? What if they say no? Then you finally make the call. And 5 minutes later, it's over. The task was difficult for an hour. But only 5 minutes of that difficulty was real. The rest happened inside your head. This is why action is so powerful. It separates imagined difficulty from actual difficulty. And once you experience that difference repeatedly, you become less afraid of starting. You begin to trust yourself. You learn, I can handle uncomfortable things. That belief is incredibly valuable. Because the goal isn't simply to complete today's task. You're building an identity of someone who acts. Someone who keeps promises to themselves. Someone who doesn't need perfect conditions. Someone who can restart after failure. And that identity becomes stronger every time you follow through. But be careful, there is another trap waiting here. You may become obsessed with productivity itself. You may start measuring every minute. You may feel guilty whenever you're resting. That's not the goal. Rest is not procrastination. Entertainment isn't automatically procrastination. Spending time with family isn't procrastination. Taking a break isn't procrastination. The difference is intentionality. If you choose to rest because you need rest, that's a decision. If you spend 2 hours scrolling because you're avoiding something important, that's avoidance. The goal isn't to eliminate enjoyment. It's to stop using enjoyment as an escape from the life you actually want. A meaningful life needs both effort and recovery. You need periods of intense focus. You also need periods when you simply breathe. You need ambition. You also need relationships. You need discipline. You also need rest. The objective is balance, not constant work. And this is why knowing your priorities matters so much. When you know what truly matters, you can work hard without trying to do everything. You can rest without guilt because you know what you're returning to. You can reject distractions without feeling like you're missing out. You can say no because you know what you're saying yes to. And eventually, this creates something much more valuable than a perfect schedule. It creates control. Control over your attention. Control over your decisions. Control over how you respond when discomfort appears. And that is what defeating procrastination is really about. Not becoming someone who never delays anything, but becoming someone who notices the delay and chooses differently. Because procrastination will always have an argument. It will say you're tired. It will say tomorrow is better. It will say you deserve a break. It will say you're not ready. It will say you need more information. It will say there's plenty of time. Sometimes those statements will be true. But sometimes they will simply be excuses designed to keep you comfortable. Your job is not to silence every thought. Your job is to decide which thoughts deserve to be obeyed. And once you learn that, something changes. You stop asking, do I feel like doing this? And you start asking, does this matter? That question can change everything. Because feelings change constantly, your priorities shouldn't change every 5 minutes. Some mornings you'll feel motivated. Other mornings you won't. Some days you'll feel confident. Other days you'll doubt yourself. But if you build your life around your feelings, your progress will always be unstable. If you build your life around meaningful commitments, you have something stronger to stand on. So tomorrow, don't try to become a completely different person. Don't create an impossible schedule. Don't promise yourself that you'll work for 10 hours. Choose one important thing. Define the first step. Give it a small amount of focused time. And then do it again and again. Because the person you become isn't created by one huge decision. You're creating that person through hundreds of tiny decisions that nobody else sees. Every time you choose to begin instead of postpone, you're strengthening a habit. Every time you return after getting distracted, you're strengthening discipline. Every time you accept an imperfect result and continue, you're weakening perfectionism. Every time you say no to something that doesn't matter, you're protecting what does. And eventually, those small choices begin to feel normal. The thing that once required enormous effort becomes routine. The task you once feared becomes familiar. The goal that once seemed impossible becomes something you're actively building. And that's when procrastination begins losing its grip. Not because it disappears, but because you become stronger than the excuse. And once you become stronger than the excuse, you begin to discover something even more important. You start realizing that procrastination isn't always about the task in front of you. Sometimes, it's about the life you're trying to build. Because when you don't know where you're going, almost any distraction can look attractive. Think about it. If you have no clear destination, why would you care which road you take? You can spend an hour scrolling. You can spend another hour watching random videos. You can answer messages. You can reorganize your desk. You can search for new information. Everything feels equally important because nothing has been clearly prioritized. But once you know what you're trying to accomplish, distractions become easier to recognize. If your goal is to become a skilled software developer, spending 3 hours watching random entertainment becomes easier to question. If your goal is to improve your health, repeatedly choosing convenience over movement becomes harder to justify. If your goal is financial independence, impulsive spending starts looking different. Your goals don't automatically remove temptation. They give you a reason to resist it. And that reason matters. Because discipline without purpose can feel like punishment. Discipline with purpose feels like direction. So take a moment and imagine your life a year from now. Not the perfect fantasy version. A realistic version. Imagine that you actually followed through on the things you've been postponing. You developed the skill you've been talking about. You improved your health. You finished the project. You applied for the opportunities you were afraid to pursue. You became more financially responsible. You spent more meaningful time with people you care about. How different would your life look? Now imagine the opposite. Imagine doing exactly what you've been doing now. Same habits, same distractions, same excuses, same, I'll start tomorrow. A year passes. Where would that leave you? This isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to wake you up. Because procrastination becomes dangerous when we only think about today's comfort. We rarely calculate the cost of repeating the same behavior for months. One missed workout doesn't change your health. But hundreds of missed workouts can. One evening of wasted time doesn't destroy your career. But years of avoiding meaningful work can. One application you don't send doesn't matter much. But a pattern of avoiding opportunities can quietly shape your future. The consequences of procrastination are often invisible at first. That's what makes it so powerful. You don't immediately see what you're losing. You simply notice that nothing is changing. And then one day you look back and realize that you spent a huge amount of time waiting. Waiting to feel motivated. Waiting to become confident. Waiting for the right opportunity. Waiting for the perfect circumstances. But life doesn't pause while you prepare. Time keeps moving. That's why one of the most important habits you can develop is learning to act before everything feels perfect. Because perfection is an endless finish line. There is always another improvement you could make. Another course you could take. Another book you could read. Another skill you could learn. Another plan you could create. At some point, you have to stop preparing and start participating. You have to enter the arena. And yes, you might make mistakes. You might look inexperienced. You might embarrass yourself. You might fail. But you'll also learn. And learning creates something that planning alone never can. Evidence. Evidence that you can actually do difficult things. Let's say you want to become better at public speaking. Reading 10 books about communication can help. Watching lectures can help. Taking notes can help. But eventually, you have to stand in front of people and speak. Your first presentation might be uncomfortable. Your voice might shake. You might forget a sentence. You might speak too quickly. That's okay. The next presentation becomes easier because you've gained experience. The 10th becomes easier still. The skill wasn't built by thinking about speaking. It was built by speaking. This principle applies everywhere. You don't become a writer by waiting until you know everything about writing. You write. You don't become a programmer by watching programming tutorials forever. You build things. You don't become fit by researching exercise indefinitely. You exercise. You don't become confident by waiting for confidence. You take action while you're uncertain. Action is the classroom, and mistakes are part of the curriculum. Now, there's another reason people procrastinate that deserves attention. They make their tasks emotionally bigger than they need to be. Imagine receiving a long email. You see several paragraphs. You think, this is going to take forever. So you don't open it. The next day, it's still there. Now you have 2 emails. Then 4. Then 10. Eventually, opening your inbox creates anxiety. The individual tasks were never enormous. The accumulation was. This is why dealing with small responsibilities early can prevent them from becoming mentally expensive. If something takes 2 minutes and genuinely needs to be done, doing it immediately can sometimes be smarter than creating another item in your mental storage. But don't turn this into an excuse to spend the whole day completing tiny tasks. Remember the difference between important and merely easy. The goal is to prevent small responsibilities from becoming unnecessary burdens while protecting enough time for meaningful work. This requires judgment, and judgment improves when you review your day. At the end of the day, ask yourself 3 simple questions. What moved me forward today? What pulled me away from my priorities? What should I change tomorrow? That's it. You don't need a complicated productivity journal. You need awareness. Maybe you discover that your phone is destroying your mornings. Maybe you discover that you work better at night. Maybe you discover that large tasks overwhelm you unless you divide them into smaller pieces. Maybe you discover that you say yes too often. Maybe you discover that you're trying to accomplish too many goals at once. These discoveries are valuable, because once you know the problem, you can design a solution. And this is where productivity becomes less about forcing yourself and more about designing your life intelligently. If you repeatedly procrastinate on a task, don't just tell yourself to try harder. Change something. Make the task smaller. Change the location. Choose a specific time. Remove distractions. Ask someone for accountability. Prepare the materials in advance. Create a deadline. Reward completion. Experiment. Your first strategy doesn't have to be perfect. You can adjust it. This is important because many people make a second mistake after discovering procrastination. They create a giant anti-procrastination system. They download 5 productivity applications. They create color-coded calendars. They build elaborate schedules. They track every minute. They create complicated routines. And then the system itself becomes another thing to procrastinate on. You don't need a system that looks impressive. You need a system you'll actually use. Sometimes the simplest system wins. Write down your most important tasks. Choose when you'll do them. Remove distractions. Start, review, repeat. That's enough for many people. And if something isn't working, change it. Don't become emotionally attached to a productivity technique. The technique exists to serve you. You don't exist to serve the technique. Now let's talk about deadlines. Deadlines can be incredibly useful because they create urgency. But relying entirely on external deadlines can create a dangerous cycle. You delay. The deadline approaches. Panic appears. You work intensely. You finish. Then you promise yourself you'll never do it again. And eventually, the same thing happens. This cycle feels productive because you eventually complete the task. But it comes with a hidden cost. Stress, poor quality, exhaustion, and the constant belief that you only work well under pressure. You can break that pattern by creating earlier personal deadlines. If something is due Friday, don't mentally schedule it for Thursday night. Give yourself an internal deadline earlier. This creates breathing room. It also makes unexpected problems less dangerous. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches your brain that action doesn't have to wait until panic arrives. You can act while the situation is still calm. That's a major shift, because procrastination often survives by telling you, there is still plenty of time. And technically, there may be. But having time doesn't mean you should spend all of it waiting. If a task can be started today, starting today reduces tomorrow's burden. This doesn't mean you should rush everything. It means you stop the existence of future time as an excuse to waste present time. Now let's consider the role of energy. Sometimes you're not procrastinating. You're genuinely exhausted. There's a difference. If you've been sleeping badly for weeks, constantly working, eating poorly, and never recovering, simply telling yourself to be more disciplined won't solve the problem. Your body and mind have limits. Good productivity includes recovery. Sleep matters. Movement matters. Food matters. Breaks matter. Time away from screens matters. If your energy is constantly depleted, difficult tasks will naturally feel harder. So don't build a life that requires you to fight your biology every day. Create routines that support your energy. Know when you're most alert. Use those periods for demanding work when possible. Save simpler tasks for lower energy periods. And protect your sleep. You don't need to be productive every minute. You need enough energy to be productive when it matters. This distinction can completely change how you think about procrastination. Sometimes the solution isn't more pressure. It's better recovery. Now let's go deeper. Why do some tasks feel almost impossible to begin? Often because the task isn't actually one task. It's a collection of smaller tasks hiding inside one label. Start a business. That's not one task. It's dozens or hundreds of decisions. Learn programming. Again, that's enormous. Write a book. Huge. Get fit. Vague. When your brain sees something enormous, it doesn't know where to begin. So define the first physical action. For a business, maybe the first step is researching 3 competitors. For programming, maybe it's installing the development environment. For a book, maybe it's writing 5 rough sentences. For fitness, maybe it's taking a 10-minute walk. You are converting a mountain into a staircase. You don't need to climb the entire mountain in one movement. You need to take the next step. And then the next. This is one of the most useful mental shifts you can make. Stop asking, how will I finish this? Ask, what is the next step? The first question can create anxiety. The second creates movement. And when you repeat that question enough times, complicated projects become manageable. You don't solve the entire future at once. You solve today's next action. There's another technique that can help when you feel overwhelmed. Write everything down. Not because writing itself solves the problem, but because your brain is terrible at holding dozens of unfinished thoughts simultaneously. You may have a project to complete, a bill to pay, a message to send, an appointment to schedule, a book to read, an idea to research, a course to finish. When all of these stay inside your head, they compete for attention. Put them somewhere external. Then separate them. What must happen today? What can happen later? What can someone else handle? What doesn't need to happen at all? This process turns mental noise into visible information. And visible information is easier to organize. But remember, your list isn't a command to do everything. It's a storage system. Your priorities decide what actually gets done. This distinction is important. A huge to-do list doesn't mean you're organized. Sometimes it simply means you've documented your overwhelm. A good list creates clarity. It tells you what matters now and what can wait. And this brings us to a principle that can dramatically improve your productivity. Learn to distinguish between high-value and low-value work. Not all tasks produce the same results. Imagine spending an hour doing something that barely affects your goals. Now imagine spending that same hour on a skill that could improve your career for years. The time is identical. The impact isn't. This is why you should regularly ask, what activities create the biggest results for me? Maybe it's studying a difficult subject. Maybe it's practicing a valuable skill. Maybe it's talking to an important client. Maybe it's creating something. Maybe it's exercising. Maybe it's spending meaningful time with family. Once you identify high-value activities, protect them. Don't allow trivial tasks to consume the hours when your attention is strongest. This is where the famous 80-20 idea can be useful. In many situations, a relatively small portion of your actions creates a disproportionately large portion of your results. The exact numbers won't always be 80 and 20. The principle is what matters. Look for the activities that matter most. Then spend more energy there. Because you don't need to become better at doing everything. You need to become better at identifying what deserves to be done. And sometimes the most productive decision is to stop doing something. That's difficult because humans hate abandoning things they've already invested time in. You may continue a course because you've already completed half of it. You may continue a project because you've already spent months on it. You may keep pursuing a goal because you once believed it was important. But circumstances change. Your interests change. Your priorities change. Your understanding changes. Something that mattered 2 years ago may no longer deserve the same attention today. Quitting the wrong thing can create room for the right thing. This doesn't mean giving up whenever something becomes difficult. That's another form of avoidance. The question is different. Are you leaving because the goal is genuinely wrong for you? Or are you leaving because the goal has become uncomfortable? Learn to distinguish those two. One requires wisdom, the other may require persistence. And this is why regular reflection matters. Every few weeks, step back from your routine. Ask, am I spending my time on the things I actually value? Are my current goals still meaningful? Is there something I should stop doing? Is there something important I've been avoiding? You don't have to wait for the end of the year to reconsider your direction. Life changes too quickly for that. Review your priorities regularly, adjust when necessary, and then return to action. Because reflection without action becomes another form of procrastination. You can think about your goals forever. At some point, the thinking has to become behavior. That is the real dividing line. People often say they want change. But wanting change and practicing change are different things. You can want to be healthier and still order the same food every day. You can want a better career and still avoid learning the necessary skills. You can want financial security and still ignore your finances. You can want to write and never open the document. Desire is important, but behavior is where desire becomes reality. And this is why your daily actions deserve more attention than your occasional bursts of motivation. One extraordinary day doesn't define your future. Your ordinary days do. What do you repeatedly do when nobody is watching? What do you do when you're tired? What do you do when the task is boring? What do you do when you don't feel confident? Those moments reveal your habits. And habits quietly shape your identity. If you repeatedly avoid difficult things, avoidance becomes familiar. If you repeatedly face difficult things, courage becomes familiar. If you repeatedly keep promises to yourself, self-trust grows. And self-trust is one of the most powerful antidotes to procrastination. When you trust yourself to follow through, you don't need as much external pressure. You don't need someone standing behind you. You know that when you say you'll do something, you'll at least make a genuine attempt. But self-trust isn't built through promises. It's built through evidence. Every small promise you keep becomes evidence. I said I'd study for 20 minutes, and I did. I said I'd go for a walk, and I did. I said I'd send the application, and I did. I said I'd stop working at a reasonable time and rest, and I did. These actions may seem insignificant. They're not. You're teaching yourself that your words have weight. And the more evidence you collect, the easier it becomes to act. Eventually, you don't need to constantly motivate yourself. You simply know what needs to happen next. That is the direction we're ultimately trying to move toward. Not a life where you are constantly fighting yourself. A life where your actions naturally support the person you want to become. And that transformation begins much smaller than most people think. It begins with one decision, one task, one focused period, one promise kept, then another, until the person who once said, "I'll do it tomorrow," begins saying something completely different. "I said I'd do it, so I'll begin now." That sentence may sound ordinary, but if you genuinely live by it, it can change almost everything. But there is one final obstacle that can quietly destroy all the progress you've made. You can understand procrastination. You can know exactly why you do it. You can create a better schedule. You can remove distractions. You can set clear goals. And yet, there will still be days when you don't follow through. That's normal. The real question isn't whether you'll ever procrastinate again. You will. The real question is what happens after you do. Because there are two very different ways to respond to failure. The first is to turn one bad day into a story about yourself. "I always do this. I'm useless. I have no discipline. I'll never change." The second is to treat the mistake as information. What happened? Why did I lose focus? What made starting difficult? What can I change next time? The first response creates shame. The second creates improvement. And this distinction matters enormously. Imagine you planned to study for 2 hours. Instead, you spent the evening watching videos. Is what happened at midnight. You could spend the next hour criticizing yourself. Or you could prepare your desk, put your phone away, decide exactly what you'll study tomorrow, and go to sleep. Which choice actually helps you? The second one. Guilt feels like punishment, but punishment doesn't automatically create discipline. Learning does. So when you fail, don't waste the failure. Study it. Maybe you were exhausted. Maybe the task was too vague. Maybe your phone was too close. Maybe you had too many goals. Maybe you were afraid the work wouldn't be good enough. Maybe you started the day without deciding what mattered. Whatever the reason, identify it. Then change something. This is how you gradually build a system that fits your real life. Not the imaginary life where everything goes perfectly. Your actual life. The one where plans change. Where unexpected problems appear. Where your energy isn't always the same. Where motivation comes and goes. A system that survives those conditions is much more valuable than a perfect schedule that collapses after one difficult day. And there is another powerful idea you should remember. Never allow a temporary failure to become a permanent identity. You are not a procrastinator in the same way that you're a permanent object. You are a person who has developed certain patterns. And patterns can change. If you have spent years delaying things, you may have trained yourself to avoid discomfort. But you can train yourself in the opposite direction. Every time you start despite resistance, you weaken the old pattern. Every time you return to work after distraction, you strengthen the new one. Every time you finish something you wanted to postpone, you're proving that change is possible. You don't need to erase the old version of yourself. You need to stop feeding it. Think of your habits like paths through a forest. The path you walk most often becomes easier to follow. If you repeatedly choose distraction, distraction becomes the familiar path. If you repeatedly choose focused action becomes easier. At first, the new path feels uncomfortable because it isn't established. But repetition changes that. Eventually, what once felt difficult starts feeling normal. That's why consistency is so important. Not intensity, consistency. You don't need to have extraordinary discipline once a month. You need ordinary discipline repeatedly. A person who studies 30 minutes every day can eventually outperform someone who studies for 10 hours once every few weeks. A person who exercises consistently can build more fitness than someone who repeatedly waits for motivation. A person who saves a manageable amount every month can build financial security over time. Small actions become powerful when they compound. And compounding doesn't only apply to money. It applies to skills, knowledge, health, relationships, confidence, habits, everything. This is why today's choices matter more than they appear to. You may think, what's the difference if I skip today? Sometimes one day really doesn't matter. But repeated days create patterns. The problem isn't the single skipped day. The problem is the sentence that often follows it. I'll skip today and start again tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes another exception, then another. Eventually, the exception becomes the habit. So create a different rule. If you miss once, restart immediately. Don't wait for Monday. Don't wait for the beginning of the month. Don't wait for a new year. Restart at the next available opportunity. Missed your morning workout. Walk in the evening. Didn't study in the afternoon. Study for 20 minutes at night. Didn't work on your project yesterday. Open it today. The fastest way to recover from procrastination is to stop negotiating with the past. You can't recover yesterday, but you can protect today. And sometimes protecting today means doing less. This may sound strange, but one of the best ways to become more productive is to stop filling every empty space. If your schedule is packed from morning until night, one unexpected event can destroy the entire day. Leave some breathing room. You don't need every minute planned. You need enough structure to know what matters and enough flexibility to handle reality. This is another reason a short list of priorities is so powerful. If something unexpected happens, you can adjust. You don't have to rebuild your entire life. You simply return to the most important task. And when the day becomes chaotic, remember this. You don't need a perfect day. You need a meaningful day. Maybe you can't complete everything. That's okay. If you complete one important task, you've created progress. If you take care of your health, you've created progress. If you spend meaningful time with someone you love, you've created progress. If you learn something valuable, you've created progress. Productivity isn't about squeezing maximum output from every hour. It's about using your limited time in a way that reflects what you value. And this is where many productivity systems fail. They measure output but ignore meaning. You can have a perfectly organized calendar and still spend your life doing things you don't care about. You can answer every email and still avoid the work that matters. You can complete hundreds of tasks and still feel empty. So don't ask only, how much did I accomplish? Ask, did I spend my time on things that matter? That question takes you beyond productivity. It takes you toward intentional living. Because ultimately, The reason you're trying to stop procrastinating isn't so you can become a machine. It's so you can have more control over your life. More time for meaningful work. More time for people. More time for learning. More time for health. More time for experiences. More time to build something you're proud of. And ironically, when you stop wasting time fighting yourself, you often discover that you don't need to work constantly. You simply need to work deliberately. Focus when it's time to focus. Rest when it's time to rest. Be present when you're with people. And stop allowing distraction to decide what happens next. This is a much healthier relationship with productivity. Now, there's something else you can do that makes action easier. Create a starting ritual. It doesn't have to be complicated. Maybe you sit at the same desk. Put your phone away. Open the same notebook. Write down the task. Take a breath. And begin. The ritual tells your brain, we're working now. Over time, the sequence itself becomes familiar. You don't have to spend 10 minutes deciding whether to start. The ritual becomes the signal. Athletes use routines. Performers use routines. Writers use routines. People who perform demanding work often create cues that help them enter the required mental state. You can do the same. And your ritual should be simple enough that you don't procrastinate on the ritual itself. The purpose isn't to create ceremony. The purpose is to remove friction. This idea of friction is incredibly important. Every action has a starting cost. If the starting cost is high, you're more likely to delay. If the starting cost is low, you're more likely to begin. So reduce the cost. Want to read more? Keep the book visible. Want to exercise? Keep your clothes ready. Want to study? Prepare the materials beforehand. Want to write? Keep the document open. Want to practice coding? Know exactly which problem you'll solve next. The easier you make the first action, the less opportunity your brain has to negotiate. And don't underestimate the power of visual reminders. If something matters, make it visible. A notebook on your desk. A simple checklist. A calendar. A written goal. Not because seeing it magically creates discipline, but because humans forget. You may genuinely care about your goal. Then the day becomes busy. And your attention moves elsewhere. A reminder brings the goal back into your awareness. This is especially useful for long-term goals. Short-term distractions are loud. Long-term goals are quiet. You need reminders to keep the quiet goals visible. But there's an even deeper strategy. Connect your habits to existing routines. For example, after breakfast, spend 15 minutes studying. After returning home, take a short walk. After dinner, review tomorrow's priorities. When one behavior consistently follows another, the first behavior becomes a trigger for the second. This makes routines easier to remember. And eventually, you don't have to think about them as much. But again, don't overload yourself. Pick 1 or 2 habits first. Let them become stable. Then add more. A common mistake is trying to rebuild your entire life in one weekend. You decide you'll wake up at 5, exercise every morning, read 50 pages, study 4 hours, stop social media, eat perfectly, learn a new skill, and become incredibly productive immediately. It feels exciting. For 3 days. Then reality hits. You miss one habit. You feel disappointed. You miss another. Soon the entire system collapses. Instead, think smaller. Change one important behavior. Make it repeatable. Then build on it. A strong foundation is more valuable than an impressive beginning. And if you want to make your progress even more reliable, create accountability. Tell someone what you're working toward. Study with a friend. Join a group. Share a deadline. Work with someone who expects you to show up. Accountability doesn't mean you can't be independent. It simply adds another reason to follow through. Sometimes knowing that someone else expects you to act can overcome the resistance you couldn't overcome alone. But don't depend on external accountability. Eventually, you need to become accountable to yourself. Because there will be moments when nobody is watching. Nobody knows whether you studied. Nobody knows whether you exercised. Nobody knows whether you worked on your project. Those private decisions shape you more than public promises. And this brings us back to self-trust. If you repeatedly tell yourself you're going to do something and then don't, you gradually stop believing your own promises. That's painful, but the reverse is also true. Keep small promises, and trust begins returning. You say, I'll work for 15 minutes. You do it. You say, I'll put my phone away. You do it. You say, I'll start at 8. You start. These tiny moments rebuild confidence. Not the loud kind of confidence that says, I can do anything. A quieter kind, I know I can rely on myself. That kind of confidence is much more useful. Because it doesn't depend on excitement. It depends on evidence. And perhaps the most important promise you can make to yourself is this. When you fall off track, you will return. You will not abandon the goal because of one bad week. You will not turn one mistake into an identity. You will not use yesterday as an excuse to waste today. You will return, again and again. That is how long-term change happens. Not through perfection, through recovery. You may never completely eliminate procrastination. And you don't need to. There will always be moments when you want the easy option. There will always be distractions. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be tasks you don't want to do. The difference is that you can become better at recognizing those moments. You can become faster at responding. You can make the first step smaller. You can protect your attention. You can remember your priorities. You can act before motivation arrives. And you can restart when you fail. That is enough. Because the goal isn't to become a person who never struggles. The goal is to become a person who doesn't let the struggle make every decision. So the next time you hear yourself say, I'll do it later, pause. Don't argue with yourself for 20 minutes. Don't create a motivational speech. Don't open another productivity video. Just ask, what would starting look like? Maybe it's opening the file. Maybe it's writing one sentence. Maybe it's reading one page. Maybe it's making one call. Maybe it's putting on your shoes. Whatever the answer is, do that. And then let the next step reveal itself. You don't need to see the entire road. You only need enough light for the next few meters. That's how almost every meaningful accomplishment begins. One small action that seemed insignificant at the time. Then another. Then another. Eventually, those actions become a skill. The skill becomes a habit. The habit becomes part of your identity. And your identity influences your choices. That's how change compounds. Not overnight, but quietly, day after day. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson about procrastination. The opposite of procrastination isn't constant work. It's intentional action. It's choosing deliberately instead of automatically. It's deciding that your attention is valuable. It's recognizing that your future deserves consideration when your present self wants comfort. It's learning to tolerate a little discomfort in exchange for something meaningful. It's understanding that you don't have to feel ready. You simply have to be willing to begin. And if you remember nothing else from this entire discussion, remember this. Your life is being shaped by what you repeatedly do. Not what you occasionally plan. Not what you intend to do someday. Not what you say you'll start next week. What you actually do. Your goals don't become real when you write them down. They become real when your daily behavior begins moving in their direction. So choose one thing, one goal, one task, one action. Make it small enough that you cannot honestly say it's impossible. Then begin. And when the voice in your head says, later, answer it with action. Not anger, not guilt, just action. Because every time you begin when you would normally postpone, you are changing something. Maybe the change is tiny. But tiny changes repeated long enough stop being tiny. They become your life. So don't wait for a better version of yourself to arrive. Build that version through today's choices. Don't wait for perfect motivation. Build momentum. Don't wait for confidence. Build evidence. Don't wait for the perfect time. Use the time you have. And don't wait for tomorrow to become someone who acts today. This is Volume and Vision. If this journey helped you see your own habits a little differently, subscribe to Volume and Vision for more practical ideas from powerful books on personal growth, productivity, mindset, discipline, and success. And before you move on to the next video, do something very simple. Think of the one task you've been postponing. The one that immediately came to mind while listening to this. Don't choose 10, choose 1. Now make the first step smaller. And after this video ends, take that step. Because information can inspire you. A good idea can motivate you. A powerful book can change the way you think. But none of those things can change your life until they become action. The future you want is not created by one giant leap. It's created by ordinary moments when you could have postponed something, but decided to begin. So begin, even if it's messy, Even if it's uncomfortable, even if you're uncertain. Begin. Then return tomorrow. And the day after that. Keep showing up. Keep taking the next step. Keep your promises to yourself. And slowly, almost without noticing, you'll look back and realize something extraordinary. The person who once kept saying, "I'll do it tomorrow," finally became the person who simply did it. Thank you for listening to Volume and Vision. Keep learning, keep growing, and when you know something matters, don't let later steal it from you. There's one final idea I want you to take with you. You don't defeat procrastination by winning one giant battle. You defeat it through hundreds of tiny moments. The moment you decide to put the phone down. The moment you open the book. The moment you write the first sentence. The moment you continue for 5 more minutes. The moment you say no to something that doesn't matter. The moment you choose sleep instead of another hour of mindless scrolling. The moment you restart after wasting an entire afternoon. These moments may feel insignificant. But they are not, because every decision is teaching you something about who you are. If you repeatedly choose avoidance, avoidance becomes easier. If you repeatedly choose action, action becomes easier. And eventually, the question changes. Instead of asking, "How do I force myself to work?" you begin asking, "What is the next thing I need to do?" That's a much better question. Because it takes emotion out of the equation. You don't have to feel inspired. You don't have to feel confident. You don't have to feel excited. You simply need to know the next step. And if you don't know the next step, that's the first problem to solve. Clarity comes before consistency. So when you feel overwhelmed, stop. Take everything that's floating around inside your head and put it somewhere you can see. Write it down. Then separate the important from the unimportant. Separate today's responsibilities from future possibilities. Separate what you control from what you don't. And then choose one thing, not everything. One thing. This may sound almost too simple. But simplicity is powerful. Most people don't need another complicated productivity system. They need fewer distractions, clearer priorities, smaller starting points, and the willingness to repeat simple actions. That's it. Imagine what would happen if you applied that approach for an entire year. Not perfectly, just consistently. Imagine reading a few pages every day, practicing a skill every day, exercising several times a week, saving a little money regularly, working on one meaningful project, having important conversations instead of avoiding them. You might not notice dramatic changes after 1 week, maybe not even after 1 month. But after a year, the difference could be enormous. This is the part of personal growth that people often underestimate. Transformation is usually quiet while it's happening. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly become disciplined. You simply make one better decision today, then another tomorrow, then another the day after. And eventually, your results begin revealing what your habits have been doing all along. This is why you should stop obsessing over dramatic changes. Focus on repeatable changes. Instead of asking, "How can I completely change my life?" ask, "What can I repeat?" Because what you can repeat is what you can build. If you can repeat 30 minutes of focused study, build around that. If you can repeat a 20-minute workout, build around that. If you can repeat writing 1 page, build around that. If you can repeat putting your phone away while working, build around that. The goal isn't to prove how much you can do once. The goal is to discover what you can continue doing. And there is another important lesson here. Don't compare your beginning with someone else's middle. One reason people procrastinate is that they compare their current abilities with someone else's finished results. You see an experienced programmer and think, "I'll never become that good." You see a successful creator and think, "I don't have what they have." You see someone in excellent shape and think, "Too far behind." You see someone financially successful and think, "I'll never catch up." And because the distance feels enormous, you don't start. But you're comparing 2 completely different moments. You are looking at their result. You're forgetting their repetitions. You don't see the thousands of hours behind their skill. You don't see the failed attempts. You don't see the bad decisions. You don't see the days when they didn't feel motivated. You only see the outcome. So don't ask, "Why am I not there yet?" Ask, "What did they repeatedly do that produced that result?" Then choose one behavior you can begin practicing. That's how you close the gap. One repetition at a time. And if you're young and listening to this, understand something particularly important. You have an advantage that money cannot buy. Time. But time is only an advantage if you use it. A person who starts building useful skills early doesn't need to become extraordinary immediately. They simply have more repetitions ahead of them. 1 year of focused effort can change your abilities. 3 years can change your career. 5 years can make you almost unrecognizable compared with where you started. But only if you stop postponing the beginning. And if you're older, the message is still the same. Don't use the time you've already lost as an argument for losing more. Maybe you should have started 5 years ago. Maybe you should have started 10 years ago. That's painful to think about. But regret cannot create yesterday. Action can create tomorrow. So start from where you are. The best time may have passed. The next best time is still available. And sometimes, the most important decision isn't what you're going to accomplish. It's what you're going to stop doing. Maybe you need to stop checking your phone every few minutes. Maybe you need to stop saying yes to everything. Maybe you need to stop endlessly consuming information without applying it. Maybe you need to stop waiting for perfect conditions. Maybe you need to stop calling yourself lazy every time you struggle. Your language matters. If you constantly tell yourself, "I'm a procrastinator," your brain starts treating that description like an identity. Try something different. "I'm learning to act sooner." "I'm getting better at focusing." "I'm becoming more consistent." Those statements aren't magic. They don't replace action. But they describe you as someone who is changing rather than someone who is permanently broken. And that distinction can matter when things become difficult. Because change is rarely a straight line. You will improve, then struggle, improve again, fall back, recover. That is normal. Don't expect yourself to behave perfectly while learning a new way of living. Expect yourself to return. Return to the plan. Return to the habit. Return to the goal. Return to the next action. Every return is a victory over the old pattern. And eventually, returning becomes automatic. You stop thinking, "I've failed." You start thinking, "Okay, let's begin again." That mindset can save you years. Because many people don't fail because they made a mistake. They fail because they decided the mistake meant they were finished. You don't have to be finished. You can always take the next step. And now, let's make this extremely practical. When you finish listening to this, don't simply say, "That was useful." Do something. Take out a piece of paper or open a note on your phone. Write down 3 things. The first is, what am I avoiding? Be honest. The second is, why am I avoiding it? Is it boredom, fear, confusion, perfectionism, distraction, too many priorities? The third is, what is the smallest action I can take? Not the complete solution, the smallest action. Then give yourself a short window of focused effort. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever feels challenging but realistic. During that time, remove the biggest distraction. Then begin. When the timer ends, you can decide whether to continue. But don't negotiate before you start. Start first. Decide later. That tiny experiment can teach you more about your procrastination than another 100 productivity videos. Because you'll experience what happens when you stop thinking and start moving. And once you experience that feeling, repeat it tomorrow. That's how you turn information into behavior. And behavior into habit. And habit into results. Remember this. You don't need more time. You need to use the time you already have more deliberately. You don't necessarily need more motivation. You need a smaller first step. You don't need a perfect plan. You need a clear next action. You don't need to eliminate every distraction. You need to make important work easier to begin. You don't need to become perfect. You need to become consistent. And you don't need to change your entire life today. You need to stop postponing the next meaningful action. That is where everything begins. Maybe your life doesn't change dramatically tomorrow. That's okay. Do the next thing. Then the next. Then the next. Eventually, your habits begin pulling your life in a new direction. And one day, you'll look back at the person you used to be. You'll remember all those nights when you said, "I'll start tomorrow." And you'll realize that the most important tomorrow was never a date on the calendar. It was simply the next opportunity you had to act. That opportunity is here again. Right now. So don't close this video and immediately return to the thing you've been avoiding. Use the momentum you've created. Take one action. Send the message. Open the document. Study the page. Put on your shoes. Clean up the first item. Make the call. Write the sentence. Start the application. Whatever it is, begin. Because action doesn't require permission. And you don't need to feel ready. You just need to be willing. Willing to be uncomfortable. Willing to make mistakes. Willing to begin badly. Willing to continue when the excitement disappears. Willing to start again when you fall off track. That willingness is more powerful than motivation. And over time, it becomes discipline. Discipline becomes consistency. Consistency creates progress. Progress creates confidence. And confidence makes the next action easier. That is how the cycle works. Not by waiting for your life to become easier. By becoming better at moving through difficulty. So the next time procrastination appears, recognize it. When it says, later, ask, why not now? When it says, I'm not ready, ask, what can I learn by starting? When it says, this is too much, ask, what is the smallest step? When it says, I already wasted today, answer, then I'll save what's left. And when it says, I'll start tomorrow, remember that tomorrow has been promised to you many times before. Today is the one you actually have. Use it, not perfectly, not dramatically, just intentionally, because your future is being built in ordinary moments. And this is one of them. Welcome to Volume and Vision. If you found something useful in this journey, subscribe to the channel for more practical lessons inspired by books on productivity, mindset, discipline, personal growth, and success. But don't make the mistake of collecting another piece of information and doing nothing with it. Take one idea, apply it, let it become part of your life. Because the purpose of knowledge isn't to make you feel like you know more. It's to help you live differently. And perhaps the simplest way to stop procrastinating is to stop waiting for the perfect moment to begin. The perfect moment rarely arrives. The useful moment is the one that's available. This one, right now. So take the first step. Then take another. And keep going. Your future self is not asking you to be perfect. Your future self is asking you to begin. Thank you for listening to Volume and Vision. Keep learning. Keep growing. Keep moving forward. And whenever you catch yourself saying, I'll do it later, remember one simple sentence. Start before you're ready. Because sometimes the smallest action you take today is the beginning of a completely different life.